a massive demonstration has taken place in Belgrade, marking the climax of more than 4 months of student-led protests. This movement represents the most significant challenge to President Aleksandar Vučić during his 11 years in power, a period increasingly defined by his autocratic rule. Vučić, in an effort to stoke tensions before the mass protest, suggested that there was an attempt to overthrow him by force. He labeled the movement an imported revolution and claimed that Western intelligence agencies were involved, though he provided no evidence for these allegations. Despite his rhetoric, the demonstrations have remained overwhelmingly peaceful, driven by deep-rooted grievances against government corruption and incompetence. Government supporters and counter-protests, demonstrators filled the streets. Hundreds of government supporters gathered in Belgrade's Pionirski Park, directly opposite the Serbian parliament. Many of these individuals were young men dressed in black, wearing baseball caps and matching backpacks. Reports from local media suggested that members of organized football hooligan groups were among them, as well as veterans of the Red Berets Special Forces Unit, a group implicated in the 2003 assassination of Serbia's Liberal Prime Minister. Zoran Đinđić. A thick police cordon separated Vučić supporters from the protesters. Officers also stationed themselves near the state broadcasting headquarters. In central Belgrade, where demonstrators had gathered, police warned protesters to move, citing the risk of an attack by pro-government groups. In a move seen as an attempt to suppress participation, the state railway company cancelled intercity train services for the day, citing security concerns. Some city transport services were also suspended, causing additional obstacles for demonstrators trying to reach the capital. However, these measures failed to deter protesters. Long convoys of cars, flying national flags and banners, made their way to Belgrade from across the country, showing solidarity with the student-led movement. Farmers and bikers joined the movement. The protest was further bolstered by the participation of farmers and bikers who joined students in the streets. Tractors, symbolizing the agricultural sector's support, rolled into Belgrade, reinforcing the movement's diverse backing. Meanwhile, hundreds of bikers rode into town in a coordinated procession, adding to the growing force opposing Vučić's administration. International reactions and political implications. Both the European Union and the United Nations called on the Serbian government to respect the right to peaceful assembly. However, Western governments have been cautious in their approach, hesitant to alienate Vučić. Many believe that fostering relations with him might help pull Serbia away from Russia's sphere of influence. Vučić has actively cultivated ties with former US President Donald Trump, including approving the construction of a Trump hotel in Belgrade. Recently, he gave an interview to Donald Trump Jr., who echoed the Serbian government's claims that foreign actors were funding and influencing the protests. The younger Trump suggested that the demonstrations had been weaponized to incite, potentially, a revolution, further pushing conspiracy theories about their organization and financing. The catalyst: a tragic incident in Novi Sad. The protests were initially triggered by a catastrophic accident in Novi Sad. On November 1, a newly renovated railway station's concrete canopy collapsed, killing 15 people. Public outrage mounted when reports emerged that government officials attempted to cover up evidence of unsafe construction practices and corruption in the Chinese-led refurbishment project. The tragedy became the tipping point for a broader movement against systemic corruption and government mismanagement. Demands for better governance. At the heart of the movement are students, who have been the driving force behind the demonstrations. Their primary demands include better governance, accountability, and the elimination of corruption that plagues public institutions. They want state services to function properly, without the need for bribes or personal connections. Unlike traditional opposition movements, these students have deliberately distanced themselves from established political parties. They argue that Serbia's opposition groups have been complicit in the stagnation and cynicism that have defined the country's political landscape. A nation at a crossroads. As the protests continue, Serbia stands at a crossroads. Vučić remains defiant, portraying the demonstrators as foreign-influenced agitators, while the protesters insist they are fighting for a better future, free from corruption and autocracy. The movement's endurance and ability to maintain momentum will determine whether it brings about substantial change or becomes another footnote in Serbia's tumultuous political history. This protest is not just about one event or one administration. It reflects the frustration of a generation demanding a transparent and accountable government. Whether their voices will lead to genuine political change remains to be seen, but their determination has already reshaped the national conversation in Serbia.